please welcome Amy Hardberger.
Hi, good morning. So my name is Amy Hardberger. I'm right down the road in Lubbock and happy to be here. We'll see if this thing wants to work. So my task today is to talk about drought, which is always a little difficult to tell anybody in a crowd like this something that they don't know about drought, because you're very well acquainted with it, I'm sure. So I think a lot about drought and what it means, and maybe is there a way that we can think about a different way of moving forward. I won't even say when the next drought comes, because arguably we're in one, although a much less. I split my time between here and Central Texas. Right now, Central Texas, oddly, is in much worse trouble than the Panhandle, so that always makes me happy. At least one of my homes is getting rain. So, you know, drought is not unfamiliar to anyone who lives out here. This is a picture from the 2011 drought. Those of you who were here remember that it sort of felt like the world was on fire. That year I was at Tech, the first time I came to Tech. I was here for that whole year, and it didn't rain a single time at my house. So that felt pretty personal at that point. This is sort of an interesting map. You know, drought is something that is not new to Texas. It is always sort of here. In fact, there was a picture that didn't seem to appear. Maybe it did. Did it appear, the 1950s drought? So, you know, we talk about drought here as something that is a permanent part of our lives and experience. And so this is just an interesting drought map between 2011 and 2022. And the similarities between those, we could look at something similar over the drought of the 50s. You know, the drought of the 50s, interestingly, when we talk about water planning, we often use the drought of the 50s as this kind of marker drought. Because it went on so long, we all know that we call that the drought of record. One of the things that's really challenging, though, about thinking about the drought of the 50s as our marker drought and how Texas came through it is to really think about how different the state is, different the population is, different the way that we use water across the state, the amount of water that we're pulling out. So what we're seeing is, even between the drought of 2011 and the drought of 2022, which arguably we're still in or out of, depending on where you live, is where the water levels were at the completion of the drought. So one of the things that we'll sort of talk about in a minute is how we think about the impacts of a drought or what a drought is doing to us. So I think that there are some dangers to think about past droughts as they can be guides, but if you don't believe how different the state is, look at various water levels across the state at the, quote, end of the 2011 drought and where they were after 2022. The differences were stark. So reservoirs and groundwater resources were significantly lower than they were after that drought. So if that drought is in fact continuing now, where does that put us? So I like to look at water levels around, you know, the January 1 level of each year and sort of use that as a metric in addition to this idea of rainfall. So I think one of the challenges we need to think about is how we frame drought as something far beyond amount of rainfall. So this is just a chart of different droughts that we've had over time and the climate, just to show the cyclic nature. Note that this ends before the most recent drought, so we have another one that's dipped down there. One of the significant differences that we're experiencing when we talk about drought, and certainly as we talk about drought planning, is that something else is happening that is additional to the lack of rain, that is having very big impacts on water resources and the need to water for agriculture, water for cities, and that is the temperature is considerably hotter, right? The last few summers have been pretty intense. I unfortunately spent one of them in in Central Texas, where it was just regularly 107. I also sit on the board of the San Antonio water system, so I do a lot of work with water utilities, and watching the amount of water that we were using as a city over the summer of 2022 and 3 compared to 2011 was significant, even though the amount of rainfall was similar. And what we have figured out is the heat is having very different impacts on how much water we're using it, where we're using it, and how we're using it. So if we're thinking about drought planning, temperature has to be as much of a conversation as rainfall. So this is a chart, this is our average temperatures across the state. So obviously I wasn't able to find this specific chart for the Panhandle, but everybody's following more or less the same trajectories. So there's two pieces here that I think are really interesting, and from what I've spoken to people and reading are impactful. One is the average daily temperature, but the other one is how little it's cooling at night. Now the Panhandle, you're lucky up here because it is drier, so you do have more cooling than areas that are more humid like the Central Texas region, but the lack of cooling overnight is impacting how we're using water, how much water you have to use. So you guys all know this, the agricultural folks know this, right? That's significant in terms of how much water loss you're gonna see from the soil, even if you are actively watering. So this idea of temperature is where I'm doing a lot of my thinking now rather than rainfall. Mostly because it's the one element that's changing a little bit. If we think about Texas has always had cyclical drought. So what do we do about this temperature? How do we respond to the temperature? I think the difference, there will be a different answer somewhat in municipal versus agricultural responses. One of the things I love about working in the Panhandle in this region is that you have these medium-sized cities co-located with rural economies, all using the same water, which means that if these groups come together, which we're already seeing, you can have an exponential impact. Whereas if you think about other areas of the state where you have large cities, yes, there might be agriculture at the peripheries of that city, but many of the city dwellers, the residents, are not tuned into those rural uses, even though they benefit from those rural uses. So the opportunities up here are much larger, I think, to collaborate, and that's, we'll talk about that in a minute. So thinking about temperature. Everybody, I'm sure, has seen different variations. These are from the state water plan in terms of the 50-year projections on how much water we're going to need projected based on population change, et cetera, and then how much we actually have. There's a large delta there, right? One is going one way, one's going up, and the other one's going down. That's not really what you want. What you ideally want is them coming together. So then, and this is under, I mean, they do run this on a drought of record. Again, that drought of record might reflect older water uses. So one of the things that's really interesting about water, I have a lot of people that ask me, well, it's kind of depressing what you do. Like, why do you work with this? Like, there's no good news. There is good news, and the good news is these are projections based on how we use water now. We have choices that we can make. We've seen this particularly, well, in urban and agricultural settings. In urban areas, you're able to measure quickly the impact of a lot of people making a different decision, or houses being built differently, et cetera, makes a huge impact. So keep in mind that the role of the state water plan is to project what the delta is and then think about what water supply measures could be implemented or accessed to fix that delta. One of those is, surprise, surprise, conservation. So how we use water can be a supply tool, and to be candid, in the Panhandle, it will have to be. There is no magic water available. By the way, I give that same answer even for areas like Central Texas. Like the cheap water is long gone in this state. So it's time to get really creative and I would say collaborative. And that's one thing that we don't
necessarily do as well as we could. So how do we, oh, there's supposed to be, I have these like different images and they're not wanting to work. So there was another slide underneath that was a cycle, the drought cycle, which is sort of, panic, plan, respond, and then it rains, and then we just kind of sit around, right? You may not feel like that's what we do, but if you look at the legislature, that's 100% of what they do, right? So love them, but they don't really pay attention until all hell breaks loose. So I'm doing a lot of research right now on the funding that was made available for flood infrastructure and making sure that we're utilizing floodwaters. And guess why we have all that? It came right after Hurricane Harvey, right? So we are highly reactive in the water world. Well, we're reactive almost in everything, but the danger for doing that in the water world is if you wait until there's a shortage, the shortage is still there. And so water is one of those places where it's really incumbent on us to be proactive. So it's a savings account. So I always talk to my students about, in my water law class, think about if you want to retire. I want to retire. It seems impossible, but maybe someday I'll be able to do it. So I, talk to a financial planner and I say I want to retire. First question I get asked is, well, when do you want to retire? And then they do this really cheerful calculation about when you're likely to die based on that. And so, how many years of income do you need? And then I am told how much I need to leave in the bank, right? If I spend all the money in the bank and then turn around and say, okay, I'm ready to retire, it's not going to go well for me. I'm certainly not going to be able to live the way I'm living, with a roof over my head. So water is very similar. If we are not thinking about this now, which of course we are, right, speaking to the choir a little bit, then we could easily get ourselves in a situation where the only choices we have are ones that we don't want to face, okay? I have a vested interest in people being able to remain in the Panhandle, and I know you guys do too. So how do we break this cycle of just responding? I was reading something that was talking about water depletion is like boiling the frog. I'm sure everybody has seen this, right? Like we just kind of sit around and think, it's okay, it's getting a little warmer, it's okay, it's getting a little warmer, it's okay, you're dead. So the idea is we need to have very difficult conversations and realize that we are in the stock pot now. This is happening. I don't know how hot the water is yet, but I do know that we're in it and we're in it together. And so how do we increase our awareness and move out, preferably out of the pot, or at least turn the temperature down? So the way that we do this is we shift from a crisis mindset to one of risk management. So instead of waiting until the crisis is here, which is very difficult economically and sometimes very difficult practically, that the water is actually not available. And so this idea of, okay, we do know a drought is coming, and we have some, I won't say comfort level, but familiarity with it. And how then do we move in all sectors, preferably collaboratively, into this idea of risk management rather than waiting for the crisis and then finger pointing at who the bad guy is, right? Cities love to point at ag as the bad guy. Ag loves to yell at cities for watering their lawn. I'm here to say everybody can do better. I'm the first person that will yell at somebody who has lawn watering. I'm the aggressive person that if you're in this doesn't happen anymore because bathrooms have the water faucet that turns off, but I used to be the person at the airport that would turn people's water faucets off aggressively. There's just no need. These people are like, anyways, it's a whole thing. So how do we do that? How do we move to this idea of risk management rather than crisis response? By the way, you always need a crisis response in place. A black swan event training is also very important. You need to know what happens if everything goes wrong. But that shouldn't be the plan, right? That's only the plan for if everything else goes wrong. We saw that during, well, y'all didn't get to see this, but some of us got to experience that when ERCOT went down during the Great Freeze. There's emergency planning that hasn't happened. So very important to do. Emergency response planning should also include the energy sector. But where we should be spending our time right now, particularly when it has rained a little bit, is this sort of anticipate what the situation is going to be, prepare how we're going to respond, not react, and then be ready to respond when the next drought or situation arises. The way to do that is to be more holistic in considering who the stakeholders are for this. I think Ag has done a very good job, particularly here, working together, working with groundwater districts, working with USDA to talk about conservation initiatives. Cities, some better than others, are doing some conservation initiatives. Oftentimes, those two sectors are not effectively collaborating with one another. And I would say there are a lot of other sectors that likely need to be in the room, right? So think about not just who your primary water users are, but who else is impacted that are water users so that you can bring them to the table, make sure that you're meeting everybody's needs in your anticipation plan. So this is not an exhaustive list, but I do think this list is broader than what most planning groups are looking at. So thinking about that more broadly. And, you know, now you have a process. And I'll be honest, processes are hassles. Everybody's over meetings, right? Who wants to do a meeting? These can take a long time. They can start very contentiously sometimes when it comes to water. And you can have moments of wondering if we're ever going to get to a successful end. I would say I've been in some of these processes and wondered these same things and thought this is never going to work, and everybody just stayed in the room because of the importance of the outcome. And I will say that one of the things I saw happen over time is that people became friends. They had invested enough of their time in these stakeholder groups that they didn't want to give up. Right? It's like if you're waiting in line for a restaurant and it's taking too long and you think, well, I'm just going to leave, but you know your name is going to get called the second that you walk out the door. It's kind of like that. At some point you're in it and you're just going to stay in it. And so these stakeholder groups can be convened by, they could be convened by the city. They could be convened by a city and a groundwater district together so that it feels like it has this kind of third party aspect to it, that we're just putting everything on the table. What are the needs of the group? What are the risks that are associated with another upcoming long-term gap? What is the science? What do we know is true about our water resources in a region? And then, you know, you sort of assess in the middle where the weak spots are, and you try to support them before they get pressed too hard. There are a lot of mitigation strategies that we can do. Water conservation obviously is one of them, but we are likely not going to conserve our way out of this. We're going to have to get more creative about the way that we use water. I will say that over the last 5 to 7 years, most of my work has focused on land use. I'm well familiar with the Texas water laws, particularly groundwater laws. We are limited in terms of how we can regulate those. But one of the ways that we can really, really affect how much water we're taking out is land use. So a lot of that is municipal. I'm watching Lubbock grow very, very quickly. I'm watching every subdivision have grass with irrigation systems in a city that doesn't rain much, and I'm wondering if this is the best use of the water that Lubbock is pumping through its system. Lubbock is not unique at all in that, so I'm not saying that Lubbock is the bad guy. But there are a lot of these other options. I can't see my... Markets are going to be big, right? So we have this idea of conservation and land use, the ones that we're more familiar with, but we also have, there's, I think, opportunities for markets, for water trading that aren't there. The legislature could create more tax incentives. I did the little survey on the QR code, and one of them was, why don't people, I think the question was something like, why don't people conserve water? And I generally think for most people it's either lack of information or lack of incentive, right? It's not malevolence or something like that. But the idea that there is a benefit to everyone when people use less water. So in any region, if one person uses less water, we've now made that available either for somebody new that's coming or a new industry or agriculture and vice versa. And so I have no problem putting a dollar sign on that savings when we're thinking about supporting the economy of a region or the state as a whole. You know, we love to talk about how fast Texas is growing, how amazing our economy is. Watch what happens to the economy if it gets out that we're about to run out of water. This is not, I will say one of the things I ask my students the very first day of water law is, do you believe we can run out of water? I've been teaching this for 12 years. In the beginning, nobody raised their hand. Interestingly, when I taught it last year, almost everybody raised their hand. I ask it at the end of the semester too. And anybody who didn't believe we could run out in the beginning of the semester, I have totally ruined their life view because they all raise their hand at the end. So don't think it's not a possibility. It 100% is if we do nothing or don't think about it. So I think you have to realize that this is a possibility to sort of get creative about your solution. So lots of mitigation strategies. Of course, any kind of stakeholder risk assessment doesn't get to this till the end. You first have to effectively understand the risk to all the different groups and stakeholders so that you can adjust and tailor your mitigation strategies to those particular groups. And I will say, understanding what's happening on the ground is critical to being able to do an effective risk assessment. I don't think I'm saying anything particularly surprising here, but this idea of thinking about temperature, how do we, what is happening? One of the things that we found in San Antonio with the temperature is that people responded to the temperature almost in a visceral way. So we saw outdoor water pumping go way up on the hottest days, even if there had been a rain event. So there was just this instinctual need of like, oh, it's really hot outside, I should water more, which is exactly when we needed people to water less. So understanding what is happening, how droughts are changing, how people are responding to them. A lot of cities are getting more and more good data about behavior that can really inform your mitigation strategies so that you're tailoring them to your actual customer. Because what's happening and what would work in Amarillo is different than San Antonio, Dallas, wherever you are. And I would say, obviously, the science also supports understanding what your water resources themselves are doing. This idea of, how we grow, where we grow, and why we grow is a hard conversation to have. We, as a community and a culture, are pretty used to private property rights, and this is what I want to do, and this is where I want to be, and we're very motivated by some of these things more individualistically. But I would encourage everybody to be part of that conversation, particularly where you have cities co-located with rural, because you're in this together. We are all in this together, and so we actually are directly impacted by one another and the choices that are made. It doesn't mean we can't have growth, but there are different ways to impact what that growth means to groundwater resources. Thinking about what the role of the state is, it's not just all on us. So here are some suggestions. I can't see my thing. So we have TCEQ drought contingency plans that cities have to turn in. I will say one thing that I would suggest here is usually if those are turned in by cities, they get a check mark for turning them in. There's no iterative response where the TCEQ reviews it and says, is that really the best you can do? Or do you think this is going to work? Or what data do you have to back it up? I would love to see, one of the things that Texas does really well is we have very good structure for these things. We have the water planning process, we have drought contingency plans, water conservation plans, but then they appear to kind of go in a drawer. Why aren't we using that process to have an iterative conversation, talk about best practices, help smaller cities that don't have a lot of resources or information about what is possible out there to tailor these particular projects? This should not be a, yep, it's complete, and off we go. Same thing with the regional planning process. I will say one opportunity that's more recent due to the recent vote is that we have, and Senator Perry, we have this large amount of money coming in that's available for infrastructure. A lot of that is focused for rural communities that would not normally have the income base to do this type of new infrastructure building or fixing infrastructure for water leaks. So that's a huge opportunity. And it's my hope in the next legislative session that this money will be made more permanent. There'll be a permanent fund to help with this. So all in there, this is my, maybe I should have started here, but this is my great uncle. He and my grandfather farmed south of Lubbock and ran a gin. I don't have a picture of my grandfather in the field, but this situation is very near and dear to my heart because one of the things I used to do regularly with my grandfather was drive around and look at the fields. So it is important to me. I also want to mention shameless plug. Texas Tech Law School is having a water law symposium on Friday, in 2 days. This is the QR code if you want to register. We are doing live or in Zoom. A lot of this overlaps, but it also would add to this program, so we would welcome to have you. If you can't do the QR code, you can do Tech Law Symposium, Google it, and it'll come right up. So I hope to see you again on Friday. That's it.